talking about spend personality specifically with regards to Microsoft Copilot, but also how it can be integrated into many different structures in your business to satisfy your specific needs. Just to give a bit of background about spend personality. So spend personality follows the philosophy that people are not defined by any particular grouping, gender, age, or area that they live. And so what they do, their actions. And I put a quote by Aristotle there, but it has also proven to be effective, which Jess will talk about later on. It tracks people's spending behavior and groups people into certain personalities based on that. So there's 6 different kind of vague groupings that people can fall into, but this is all done via a scoring system. So people can be, for example, 75% intentional, 25% introverted. So people don't necessarily fit into one box. So to take you through the 6 different kinds of personalities, the intentional spender, you'll see a lot more methodical and deliberate spending. So thinking about kind of long-term goals and investments. The industrious spenders, similar to that, they'll invest in things that optimize their lives, such as like upgrading their homes or their transportation. The introverted spender you'll see a lot of consistency in their spending, investing in hobbies. And then you have the extroverted group of personalities where people spend on activities where they can be more socially engaged and it connects them to other people. You can see people in the enthusiastic spending group that have kind of more dynamic lifestyles and don't necessarily stick to one specific hobby. And then the experiential spender that invests in activities and novelties. These are just some kind of characteristics that we've identified by following people's spending and informing it with social science and behavioral analysis. I'm going to hand over to
Nika, just before you deviate from that, if I could just give a view on the spend personalities themselves. So the personality, the groupings or the segments of the personalities that we've got here is informed by the ocean model of understanding human personality, where you've ultimately got pillars of understanding that form an overarching view of an entire person's interactions and actions, which is how you can get somebody that has scores on each of these. Now, something about personality in the sense, which is quite interesting, is that there is personality drift, right? There is shifts and changes in how a person's personality presents itself as time goes on. You often see this when there are significant life changes. For example, if there is a child introduced into a space, you'll see people that'll spend more like an enthusiastic versus if they were an introvert or an intentional spender before. And then as they shift into this enthusiastic space, you'll see them over time start to move into the more industrious space as they find their balances and their rhythms thereafter. So when we talk about spend personality, we're not talking about a static category that you fall into. We're talking about something that picks up on the nuances and subtleties of who you are as life progresses and as your day-to-day experiences change throughout the space of a week or a month or a year. And the most important points of the customer spend personality.
Thanks for clarifying that. I think it is very important to draw attention to the fact that it is a dynamic kind of categorization. It's smart segmentation. It's not just putting people into boxes, it's seeing them as moving, changing beings. So I'm going to ask Bodhi to give us more clarity about the scoring system and a bit more of a technical overview.
Let me share my screen as well. I wanted to emphasize not only the structure of how the spend personality system works itself, but some of the inherent powers of the platform in how it's designed. And mainly with respect to the fact that it's completely headless. So it's completely designed to the open API spec, which is how the entire web is designed. So it's very easy to bolt functionality from within the platform, including the spend personality module, into a variety of other pieces of software. You can find some really interesting combinations and use cases to solve some very interesting business problems by using that. In demonstrating the spend personality scoring, I wanted to show how you can literally go on a ChatGPT. Any of us could go here right now and do it. You can interface with the spend personality module through this large language model. As you all know, later we're going to speak a little bit about how this relates to Copilot and stuff. But I feel like ChatGPT is also quite an interesting example of it. Now, let me be more specific. Yeah, so now we can see it's asking for the spend personality. Now it's going to ask for permission here, because the large language model is going to construct an API call to the ecosystem bank instance. It's going to retrieve the spend scores and format it nicely for us. Let's give it a moment to think. Talking to the connector.
Perhaps while it's thinking, we can talk about what we mean by the spend personality module.
Yeah, so within the platform, you can design lots of different projects and use cases yourself. It's kind of a very open sandbox, and there's a lot you can do. It can be that's overwhelming feeling, especially from a business perspective, when there's so much functionality within a product, you're not sure where to even begin. So how ecosystem has kind of gone around this, just for demonstrative purposes, to solve actual business problems, is the modular design, where we give you a pre-configured use case, an entire slice of the platform's tech stack. So giving you kind of a piece of everything to show how the platform can be used in a real practical way. Spend personality is one example of that. And then as we can see, it talked to Bank Runtime 2, which is where one of the spend personality models pulled back scores for customer 590. So now I'm going to ask it for customer 581 score, spend personality. So the reason why I'm calling now for another score is because I want to show you it's a very open toolbox here, because we can, what I'm going to ask it to do in advance is compare customers 590 and 851 with a radar graph. This is a nice way of visualizing the spend scores themselves, while simultaneously comparing and contrasting the relationships between two different customers and how they may be different in how they interface with your enterprise. So let's give it a moment to think.
Just for clarity on the module, if you were to get the module, you say it's this vertical slice out of the platform, what would you ultimately do with the spend personality module? What would you get out of it? What kind of a use case is this exactly solving?
That can depend on the business problem you're applying it to. But the real strength of spend personality is within customer segmentation. It can be a sophisticated way of redefining how you understand your customer base. Using that, you can drive very effective personalized messaging. If you understand what it means to have a certain value for a given spend personality archetype, you can adjust your messaging to your customer base when talking about implementing at scale, using some models and either some cloud compute or some on-premises setup, depending on who you are and where you are. You can implement at scale and really power up the personalization of how you interact with your customers to drive uplift in terms of key performance indicators.
A business can use this information in a lot of different ways. Like, one business might want to just kind of hone in on the majority personality that this customer displays, but maybe another business might want to adjust messaging that kind of combines within the ratio of their personality, combines the messaging styles to kind of appeal to each fraction. So how can a business choose how to configure structure based on the results of the spending personality?
Yeah, 100%. The level of granularity with which you want to use the spend personality scores that you reveal about your customer base is completely up to you. How you want the spend personality scores to inform any given campaign or use case is customizable and up to you. With minimal pipelining, you can get it to be set up in a lot of different ways. So yeah, the sort of default that the platform is currently configured in is that when you call the API, it'll tell you right off the bat what is the most prominent personality archetype for that given customer. and then it'll essentially assume that's the personality type the predictor recommends. You can configure it to be much more dynamic in the sense that, yeah, like you're talking about, you could adjust it so that it sends messaging in proportion to all of someone's personality values.
It does really sound like the power of all of this actually lies within the score itself, right? You get the module, run analysis on your current customer data, and then get the scores for them. You can then apply certain activities and actions once you understand that. It's the score that actually holds all the power.
Yeah, 100%. At the end of the day, that's what the spend personality module is offering you, is an understanding. It assumes you have an understanding of how the personality system is designed. But then at the end of the day, it is just offering you the scores and the set of scores for your customer base. The two data sets you typically need to reveal the spend personality score for some set of customers is you're going to want some demographic information, so some demographic customer database, and then transactional volume. So you're going to want transactional history in regards to all of those customers, because that is how the algorithm actually determines score values. Is it looks at how you have spent your money historically and converts that into scores by categorizing different spends at different times in different ways. At the end of the day, the value you're getting out is the score.
Yes, and then to expand on what Bodhi was saying about having an understanding of the personality framework, and you wouldn't just be given a brief overview of intentionals and industrious. There's actually a lot of information passed along with this module about who these personalities are and what they're most likely in, the situational preferences and preferences in terms of communication and that kind of thing. But something worth noting that there would be subtle changes and differentiations within that, because your customers are unique. They are a very unique personality that can't necessarily be blanketed. Once you have that initial understanding and run the initial analysis on your data sets to get a preview of who these customers are, you can take that one step further to experiment and dig deeper and truly get to know who your customers are. You can ultimately tailor what these personalities mean on a very granular level, even further.
Maybe, Bodhi, if you can take us into the background stuff that happens when you are playing around with spend personality capabilities and trying to incorporate it into your business's system. So we're going to be looking at the Workbench, which is where you can install all the capabilities of the different modules, configure them, test them, and tailor them to your business's needs. Bodhi, if you can just walk us through the process.
Yeah, so right now, as you guys can see, we're on the Workbench. For those of you that don't know, this is the low and no code native environment that ecosystem provides to be able to interface with the platform. You can easily interact with it in a variety of different ways, including like Jupyter notebooks and lots of interesting stuff. But this is the native UI version of how you can interact with the platform. I just wanted to emphasize how straightforward it is to implement this model on your system. I have the spend personality zip for this version, and I'm going to upload it. All the modules come as zip files and quite small zip files. Any use cases you develop or make on your own, you can also just export as zip files. So that's how the Workbench keeps track of project configurations. You can easily hand them back and forth just in zip format. It's just going to take a little second to upload before we can import it.
Also, you mentioned the fact that you can actually build your own modules in this Workbench. It's a no-code environment where you can combine capabilities in a way that speaks to a certain use case that your business needs. I think it's worth mentioning that.
The modules are only supposed to be an indicator or an idea sparker. At the end of the day, you're going to want to be creating custom use cases to solve your business problems.
And that sounds like it's fairly easy to do, right? So once you have that module as that introduction, if you will, to this space, and you play around within that, you see how the configurations are placed and what you can do with it, then building your own module becomes an easier step thereafter, right? To building your own projects and configurations, implementations.
100%. Wish I had some elevator music.
Yeah.
That would have been perfect.
Always in the demos, right? It's always
It
the
was.
live demos. I think Rob had a
Yeah.
term for it's the live demo. Yeah, I don't know, the little curse. As soon as you do something live, it
Demo
takes
artists.
longer.
Demo artists.
Demo artists. That's right.
Okay, so we've successfully uploaded it, and now we're going to import the actual configuration into our project. This should be a little bit quicker. But it's also going to show us a log of it's imported, which is going to give us a clue as to what is actually what a module is actually comprised of, because we throw the word around quite loosely, but it is like some very definite components that ultimately add up to create a module.
And then also I just wanted to touch on the fact that this no-code environment is one way in which you can engage with ecosystems capabilities. So there are also code environments and low-code environments. It speaks to the flexibility of how you can engage with the product.
Yeah, I think that speaks directly to the whole ecosystem of technologies. There are various different interfaces, various different connections. And as Bodhi mentioned earlier, it's all headless. So it's not sort of one static, very complete box that you need to access everything through. It's all dynamic, and it communicates with open source technologies as well. Yeah. But I don't know if you have an example of the Jupyter notebooks, which is one of the ways that you can.
Yeah.
Well.
Open here. Oof, this is my ugly notebook. Don't look at that. Wait, I should actually, because I think this is. We go here. Wait, this is, yeah. I mean, this is my personal notebook, so this I suppose isn't as great an example because I haven't loaded up. I mean, I can't do that. It'll only take a second. Oh, that's the wrong button. Yeah, so there's some default notebooks that come with the platform to help you build fluency in understanding how you should actually structure it. So it's all in Python. Our local Python wizard, Ramsey, has put a lot of this stuff together to show you how you could actually completely build and configure any sort of model or functionality that is within the Workbench front to back using just the notebook and coding it out. It's very straightforward. The structure is monotonous and stuff, but that's the simplicity that is going to make it very legible. Yeah, there's some more.
So this would ultimately be included in the module as well.
Yeah, this comes with the platform itself. Here's an example of how to set up a simulation in Python with the notebooks. Logging in and setting it up. If you're more comfortable in this environment and want more control, this is where you would go, the notebooks. Where were we? Yeah, there we go. So we missed our import log, but anyways, yeah, here is the project details. So as you can see, with just 2 buttons and 5 minutes of time, you can take the zip file into a fully set up set of use cases on your platform. So here's a bunch of generic product description. And then under here, we can see what we would have seen in our logs in terms of what it comprises the module itself. So there's a bunch of data files. As I was talking about earlier, there's customer and transactional data sets that you need in order to get spend personality off the ground. And then there's
in here. So obviously this is synthetic data that's been generated for the sake of testing and seeing if the module works. But if the business doesn't have data to add, what then?
Yeah, so this is all synthetic data for demonstrative purposes. You'll have to import and engineer your own data sets before you can run the ecosystem algorithms through them. But here, if we go under project deployments, we can see the actual deployments that form the module. So those were all the individual components in terms of files and specific configurations. These are the actual deployments that you can push to the runtimes and actually make API calls to, and that can power power solving some business problem. So as you were just talking about, Nicola, there's two main aspects to spend personality that it's definitely worth talking about. So there's the generic sort of static one where you bring those two data sets we're talking about, and then you run them in feature engineering. You run them through the ecosystem personality algorithms, which will take a little time and it will process all that data, and it's going to output a new data collection with all the personality scores for each customer. And then when you make API calls to this deployment of the spend personality, you are querying that database for spend personality scores. But there is also a dynamic deployment. So that's what we mean here when we say spend personality dynamic. This uses a dynamic model based on a Thompson sampling algorithm to converge on customer spend personalities in real time. Essentially, it's designed for what's in data science the cold start problem. So that's when you want to be able to make informed predictions in regards to some customer base, let's say, but you don't have any historical data to work with. So then what these algorithms do is that they use the real-time data they receive by making offers to explore which offers fit which people best, and then exploit the ones that are optimal. So in regards to spend personality, what this does is it essentially experiments with these customers. It converges on what their spend personalities are. This is for that cold start situation when you don't necessarily have data, when you're trying to sign a new customer. So that's the function of the dynamic deployment. That is one of the
back to now, which I think is quite important. When you're trying to sign a new customer, when we talk about spend personality, we talk about above and beyond traditional demographics. It's no longer effective and hasn't been for quite a while to classify somebody by their gender, age, or income brackets. You need something that's more human. You need something that's more real. And, so you can't necessarily just go somebody that has the same demographics, or our customer base that has the same demographics as this new person clearly means that this new person is going to have the same personality, because they won't. So I feel like you would have a situation, right, Bodhi, in which you would have your static model working on your existing data sets or your customer data sets while you've got dynamic models that are running on anybody else new that comes into that space. They could be running parallel, where you're really constantly learning about who these people are, and rather than your assumptions about who they are based on demographics or classical approaches.
Yeah, definitely. So just to explain a little bit there, yeah, part of the benefit of how is that the platform is completely containerized. So, and that's part of the horizontal scalability of it, which allows it to be implemented at such scale so quickly compared to many other artificial intelligence and machine learning platforms. You can just spin up infinitely more containers depending on how much compute you have access to. And in that way, you can set up as many use cases running parallel as you want. So yeah, you can completely have it set up so that you have a set of dynamic models that are specifically responsible for making predictions about new customers versus your set of static models, which you are obviously pre-trained. That's what we mean by static model, is that it's a pre-trained model that you run periodically to update the relevance of the scores. You can still have that pipelined into a bunch of recommenders that are connecting optimal offers with customers. Nicola?
If you're done showing what's up in the workbench, maybe we could move into the kind of convergence between Microsoft Copilot and spend personality, just to kind of demonstrate how it can be used in combination with different tools.
Yeah. Anywhere you have functionality to make an API call, you can bolt in ecosystem functionality. One example of that is Copilot, and this is more relevant to an enterprise actual use case than the ChatGPT stuff we looked at earlier, even though that's a little bit shinier. Obviously, you can configure so that your entire businesses or your entire enterprise's set of machines that are running Windows, that those copilots all come with a spend personality copilot built in. We're here in the Copilot studio, and we can see that there's like a setup is quite a kind of bare bones, but I mean it gets the job done in terms of it's a custom copilot which is being configured here through like a set of nodes that are chained together to make API calls to the spend personality API and retrieve scores. If we look back here, this is a little bit more of a gimmicky one, but I think it's fun, maybe for demo purposes. This is linked to a spend personality quiz that you can take. Hello, this is the spend personality copilot virtual assistant to help you understanding spend personality, blah, blah, blah. Spend personality quiz is a quick way for you to get your score and obtain insights about your behavior. This is not a financial advice. Would you like to take your quiz? Let me just say yes. And now it's going to ask me a bunch of questions around my financial habits. I'm just going to pick randomly and not think about it too much. And if we look here on the side, this is how this Copilot is actually set up to add this functionality that obviously isn't out of the box in Copilot. You can quite easily in the studio, you can set up, here we go. So I answered all the questions and it told me my spend personality is industrious and my score is 6. My extrovert score is 5.2 and my introvert score is 5.5. That makes sense. I do have the link to the quiz website and you guys should, or whoever wants to, should be able to
Post your spend personality
in the chat. I'm curious to see it. So if you guys follow that link I dropped in the chat, you can do this quiz yourself. It's a little bit gimmicky, but I feel like it does capture the heart of the spend personality module. So if you can take away one thing about spend personality from all the discussions that we've had, it's definitely that you take as an input financial data. So in this case, it's self-reported financial data. So take it as you will, but you take financial data and output a numerical score that is quite dense in information. You can use that score to inform a wide variety of ways of interacting with this person. And I mean, obviously for yourself, it's just interesting to find out what the spend personality algorithm thinks of you.
And you could configure this so that it's not so much externally facing towards the customer, but maybe, for example, an agent in a call center could fetch a customer ID when they receive a call and retrieve kind of their spend personality. And then that can inform how they communicate with this customer. So there are different ways that you can use it, different kind of practical capabilities.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great example of using the Copilot integration. You could set this up so that your entire call center is running one of these agents. When they respond to a call from a customer complaining some issue, you just retrieve their customer number, and then your call center agent can easily plug that into their Copilot built into their Word and browser, and then they can retrieve personality information about that person. And then they already have an idea of how to more optimally engage with this person so as to meet their needs. And that's going to be good for KPIs.
So I just wanted to put a note here. I put my score into the chat. I did 2 different tests. The first one is me pre-baby, and I scored a 6.9 extrovert. Then I've done it as me post-baby, and I've got an 8.9 in intentional, which totally makes sense because it's like, you know, I haven't necessarily changed. And I think this also speaks very well to what it means when we talk about spend personality, right? It's got very little to do with your personality as an individual human. It's not us saying that your MBTI characteristics are this, which means that you're an enthusiastic personality, or your ocean model characteristics are this. We're talking about the way that you spend, the way that you fit into that space of making purchases and the decisions that you make around the money that you spend on the things that you get back. And that's why things can change as much as they do. And it's why you can have different states of life ultimately inform the type of person you're becoming. So, me as an extrovert spender pre-baby doesn't necessarily mean I've changed that much. It just means I had to prioritize other kinds of purchases to pay attention to what my family needs over what I need as an individual. I think that's quite powerful.
Like you said, your behavior and the way you thought about priorities and things in your life changes. So the system, will the system be able to pick up on those, like, even if it's like super subtle, those nuances? Maybe you're still an extrovert when it comes to your day-to-day spending, but when it comes to investments, you're more industrious. Well, the system will pick that up.
So that links to something we haven't yet spoken about, but it's kind of important. And some of you may have spotted when we were on the Workbench and we were looking at all the different deployments. There is another component to the spend personality module, money personality. That's derived in similar ways, but it doesn't focus mainly on purchases and transactions. It focuses mainly on financial management. You need data related to exactly how you invest, like insurance behavior in terms of your own personal finance, in terms of income and how regular income is and what volume it comes. Money personality is an adjacent system that specializes in understanding how your customers manage their finances. So that's another face to the spend personality module that we haven't even yet actually had a chance to speak about. Jess, did I cut you off?
Yeah, no, not at all. I think it's a very important thing to point out. You do have money personality, which is included in the spend personality module. It is something that you can get on its own, but money personality, the reason why we lead with spend personality is that it is an easier way to get to understand your customers, because obviously spending behavior is a lot more habitual rather than all of the other factors, and all of those other factors tends to take a little bit of a longer time frame to truly get an understanding of, where your spend personality can happen changed on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a secondary basis if needs be. Richard, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I'm just driving, so I won't put my camera on. I just wanted to know, so inevitably we'll get a question from a customer that says, well, what's the kind of minimum amount of data we need to feed in to get a decent score or a decent spend person, a decent confidence of spend personality? Is it, and I'm talking about, obviously the various bits of data, be it transactions or whatever it may be. So maybe you could just answer that.
Yeah, so there's another component that we didn't touch on in the spend personality module, and that's a model selector. So there's a deployment that specializes in a set of customers in which there's a variance in how much data is available, because as you say, it's seldom that in a real world situation you have the same amount of information about everyone. So the speciality of the model selector is that in a given customer set where there's a reasonably high variance in information about or data about all your customers, is it makes the decision as whether to use the static pre-trained algorithms or to the dynamic personality dynamic that we were speaking about, which is about converging, like given like almost zero data, then converging in real time on it. So that is the function of the model selector.
Right, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
I think from a behavioral analyst perspective, something that I would say, obviously don't necessarily talk from the data side, but from the understanding side, from the knowing your customer side, more of the theory behind it, is that these things get better over time, because the more time that you spend within the space, the more time that you spend experimenting and testing and probing and learning from your customers about who they are, rather than applying a preconceived set of ideas onto who these customers are, it would just get better. So I guess it doesn't necessarily answer your question in terms of how much data you need, because Brody definitely answered that. Just from a human perspective, more time will make these things better as you go.
Generally, if you have access to 1 calendar year of customers' transaction data, that is what we like. We can work with less, but that gives you at least the cycles, the main cycles that customers generally go through. One calendar year allows us to get the rituals around various holidays and things like it. And then the more the better, but like Buddy says, you've got dynamic, where you can sort of generate the data as you're engaging with them. You can work around with the data that the customer has.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Robert. I didn't raise that. Once you get 1 calendar year, you have information about seasonal data, which is also very helpful. Is there any more questions? We've got our final 10 minutes. So speak now. Is there anything?
I wanted to ask the Copilot. That's something we've been speaking about a lot recently. This is an AI agent, right?
Yeah, 100%. Copilot Studio is a platform for designing your own agent with access to the big Copilot large language model behind it. So there's like settings in here.
But do you need Copilot? That's sort of my question is.
In what sense?
Do you need Copilot to be able to interact and extract personality scores if you don't have a Microsoft infrastructure within your business?
Oh, yeah. No, so yeah, no, this is just one example of it, but no, not at all. I mean, that links back to what we've been reiterating. It's very easy to set up pipelines, or relatively easy, right, to set up pipelines into the platform because of that open API spec that the architecture is designed to. So no, it doesn't need to be Copilot. This is just one example. It can be a million other things.
Yeah, I wanted to give people a chance to ask questions before I went on a rant, but I recently delved into our ecogentic module. If you don't have an inbuilt AI agent, we have a platform to build your own agents, which you can then incorporate all our capabilities into. And you can also kind of use components of your existing technological systems as moving parts in this agentic framework. And I think that's probably very attractive to businesses like banks specifically, because banks are very concerned about what data an agent may be using or has access to. So by having control over the creation of your agent, you can make sure that they stay within certain guardrails. We also have a fact injection capability where you can tell your agent only to access a certain pool of information and not other pools. Our platform is very dynamic and there are lots of different things that you can do with it. You're not limited to plugging it into certain agents. You can create your own, which I think is very cool.
There's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with the journey management and agent creation that is built into the sort of the ecogentic side of the platform. Yeah.
Great. I would love to open the floor up to anyone who has questions, because we are nearing the end of our session. No one?
I was quite excited by the number of, I even dropped a note in the chat, the number of intentional personalities. From somebody that sort of worked within this space and identifying people's personalities, one of the reasons why we emphasize the fact that it's got very little to do with your personal personality is that you often get that misunderstanding where people have a view or an assumption about themselves and it actually presents in a very different way. I would love to be able to go on a whole mission and try to understand the relationship between people that do the quiz and get an intentional response, and you look at the actual spend data and discover more experiential or enthusiastic personality traits that come up. It would be quite interesting to see something like that.
I was also going to comment on that. I think that's part of the problems you face with self-reported data, is that people kind of unconsciously, and I'm definitely a victim of this. Unconsciously, how you think about your own spending is not necessarily the same what your last fiscal year of transactions actually looks like.
Yes.
That's
But I think it can be
great
quite
point.
powerful as a way to, from a wellness perspective, guide people into a place where you end them up in the view of themselves. So whatever this quiz is, whatever they want to be spending like, and then you see the realities of what they're spending like, you can use that information and an understanding of what these personalities respond to and communicate effectively with them to get them from the reality into that desire and ultimately reflect what they want for themselves.
Yeah, so there's definitely, I mean, if there's interest from the enterprise, there's definitely financial wellness capabilities that you could extract from spend personality.
And I mean, especially because also with these, you know, something powerful that the spend personalities give you is the ability to communicate effectively with these people. You know, choosing the right language, choosing the right punctuation, even the right rhythm of engagement. How often do you engage? What types of words do you use? What types of incentives do you use to get people to behave in certain ways? You might find that intentional spenders are actually turned off by gamification, which some banks rely on quite heavily.
I know I am. I don't like it if I can tell that I'm being played.
Yeah, exactly. But some people love it, right? I quite enjoy the gamification in some aspects and not in
Me too. And it's like I just kind of thought about it now, you know, in comparison to a different module that on our platform, like the way people interact with banking apps and their money is, in my personal experience, completely different from the way you would interact on an app interface of a business you're buying something from or browsing. Money is something very delicate and personal. Maybe you think of yourself as an extrovert, and that shows in an app where you're buying clothes on an e-commerce site, but like with your money, it's something completely different.
Sorry, Cara, you cut out for a second there. You were referencing other modules like the interaction science module.
Yeah, I was just saying that this module is like, it's so special because it's specifically for that like very personal thing. Like money is a very personal thing, and you have a very specific behavior towards it and how you interact with it, as opposed to just an app or a website.
Talking about the interaction science module, there is also interaction personality that we've got. We have a module for that as well. And that is very different to the spend personality module. That looks more rather into, you know, rather than looking at your transactional behaviors or how you spend money, it looks into the ways in which you engage in an app environment or the ways in which you are responding to outreach from a company. So your interaction personality can be used across multiple different spaces and environments, whereas spend personality is very much linked and embedded in transactional spend behavior. And we've got modules for all of these.
Great.
Give us a call.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this is a good session. It's always good to delve into these things, and I always learn something new every time. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully see you in our next meetup.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Well
you.
done,
Guys.
everyone.
See you all next week.
Guys, have a good rest of the day.
Bye.